And you feel like, how did I get here? What did I do? I fooled them.
I don't deserve to be here.
I don't deserve to be here. Yeah. How am I going to make sure that I can, achieve or do the things that they think that I'm going to do? And so you overcompensate.
Feeling like a faker or like you're pulling the wool over everyone's eyes can be common among neurodivergent people. What is imposter syndrome, and why do so many bright people question themselves? And what impact does the big fish, little pond effect have on them? Today's guest, Dr. Lindsay Lee, is joining us to answer the question we all have. Am I the imposter among us? That's straight ahead on episode 198. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and this is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
What is neurodiversity? You see the world differently.
Autism spectrum.
Gifted.
Complexities that are inherently inside.
ADHD.
Dysgraphia.
Tourette's.
All brains are different.
You are exactly what this world needs.
This is the
Neurodiversity
Podcast.
If you are looking for professional development for yourself or your faculty about how to support neurodivergent learners, you should check out some of our professional development training. We currently have courses available on supporting twice exceptional learners and how educators can support students who struggle with reading due to dyslexia. You can take these courses for your own learning or use them in your schools to advance the skills of the teachers supporting these students. Go to neurodiversity.university to find out more information or send us an email through the contact page on that same site. That's neurodiversity.university. All right, my conversation with Lindsay is up next.
Previously on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
Today we'll be talking about dyslexia with Dr. Dan Peters.
It presents in gifted people. It can present in similar ways, which we'll talk about, but it's also hidden. Stealth dyslexics or gifted dyslexics, they often don't read out loud. They often read in a choppy, slow way. They either will actually skim through the page and bounce all around and then get the gist of it, which they're very good at, or they'll read very slowly and run out of time.
Yeah.
Dyslexics generally need to get hands-on. They need to talk it through. They need to understand the story. It's really about making things meaningful and contextual and removing the barriers.
That's episode 59. Look for it wherever you get your podcasts.
Lindsay Lee published a study recently about imposter phenomenon. It's something commonly found in neurodivergent populations and people in general, and I think it's safe to say that we've all experienced it at some point in our lives. Lindsay, thank you for taking the time.
I'm excited to get to talk to you.
I'm curious. I'm assuming that your interest in imposter syndrome began before the craziness about Among Us.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about what got you interested in this and where some of your focus came from.
It was kind of a internal struggle that I faced in graduate school, honestly. Talking with Dr. Ann Wren was really what drove it. She was really interested in self-beliefs. And that was actually what her dissertation was on, was understanding like the big fish, little pond effect, and understanding like what we do about ourselves and what contributes to that. And I was getting it really interested in perfectionism, and being overly critical of myself was contributing to more perfectionistic beliefs for myself. But she was like, "Have you ever heard of the imposter phenomenon?" And it kind of drove me to want to seek more information about, okay, what is the imposter phenomenon and how is it happening in graduate school to so many of my friends, including myself?
I think that that's a common experience for a lot of people, which I think we'll talk about as we go through. Why don't we start, though, what is imposter syndrome for our audience who maybe isn't familiar or maybe kind of knows just a little bit but hasn't really thought a lot about it?
The imposter phenomenon, or sometimes it's called imposter syndrome. So you feel this sense of falseness or phoniness, or like you're inauthentic, like you're fake. I'm false. I'm not supposed to be doing this. Despite evidence of success or competence, it's difficulty internalizing the success that you've achieved and feeling like you weren't worthy.
I think a lot of times people who things come easily to can get caught in that trap because it feels unearned.
Yeah. I mean, all people experience imposter feelings. It's not just, highly able or gifted students, which is also an area I'm interested in. But once you achieve success, you're like, okay, well, how did I do that? And people want to ask you, like, how did you achieve that at such an early age? Or how did you, come up with this or that? And you're like, I don't know.
A term that I originally heard, I think in one of Jim Webb's books, A Parent's Guide to Gifted Children, he talked about goal vaulting, which was basically like, as people, especially high ability individuals, start to reach a goal, as soon as they get close to the goal, they kind of raise the bar, and so it's kind of this consistent thing, but you forget about all of those little gradual steps that you've taken to get to that point. And so therefore, other people from the outside can see how far you have come or what you have achieved. But internally, it feels minimal.
That coincides with what is found in the literature about motivation and attributing your success to different things, and also setting that goalpost, that what you're saying, like you're, if I got here, now I need to get here to be successful. And are you setting those high expectations because you are setting them for yourself, or is it some external force that you feel like is setting those expectations? And that's what I was interested in.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier a connection to perfectionism, which makes a lot of sense. And in the paper that you wrote, where you talk a lot about this, I really love that you addressed the 3 types of perfectionism that are described in the multidimensional perfectionism scale. The authors' names aren't coming to mind, but self-oriented, socially prescribed, and others-oriented. Can you talk about those a little bit and how that influences the imposter phenomenon?
Oh, yeah. So it's Hewitt and Flet's scale that we used, but there's other multidimensional perfectionism scales as well. But within their scale, self-oriented perfectionism is where you set high standards for yourself. So that's self-driven perfectionism. Whereas socially oriented perfectionism is that you feel that other people have high expectations for you. And then other-oriented perfectionism is where you place high expectations on other people. And we were concerned with self-oriented perfectionism and socially prescribed, mainly because the literature suggests that other-oriented perfectionism, you're placing standards on other people. If you're thinking about your own self-perceptions, might be difficult to parse out in a model. So we excluded that part, but the others were interesting to look at.
Perfectionism, I think, is just really misunderstood in general. And so to kind of look at it from those different angles is important. Analyzing, like, are these expectations that I have for myself, or are they expectations that I'm internalizing, or are they expectations that I'm putting on myself, but I feel like other people are like putting on me, which is a whole different thing, which is not related. But I feel like there's a lot of, I don't know, depending on a person's level of awareness, and that perfectionism can be kind of in a range of healthy-ish to really unhealthy.
Yeah, the adaptive versus maladaptive perfectionism. There's been studies about how perfectionism can be adaptive, especially if it's self-oriented. That's the most healthy version of perfectionism, versus socially prescribed and other-oriented are more focused on other people and how their expectations, which is more maladaptive, which I was interested in. Okay, if you're having these maladaptive tendencies, how is that contributing to your imposter beliefs?
Yeah. What did you end up finding? I mean, which types of perfectionism ended up being more closely associated with feelings of being an imposter, of, having unearned accolades?
So socially prescribed perfectionism had the strongest relationship with imposter feelings. I feel like that makes sense. If you think that other people think you should be achieving at some high level and you aren't, or you haven't in a little while, you might feel like a fraud. And then we also found that honors college participation also contributed.
Sometimes I find myself in counseling sessions with my clients and referring back to the phrase, feelings aren't facts. Like, just because you feel that way doesn't mean that it's necessarily based in truth or reality. And we have to really examine those things.
Absolutely. The cognitive behavioral therapy is shown to be really effective. I don't know if that's the type you're talking about, but like, let's rationalize these beliefs and look at all these positives that you have achieved.
Right.
Just because you're having these negative feelings doesn't mean that it's factual.
The study that you did was based on honors college students. And one of the things that you discuss, and you mentioned it earlier, is that big fish, little pond effect and how that influences things. And I think that's really definitely a major factor for individuals who are used to succeeding. And then all of a sudden, they're at the top of their game when they're in high school. Or, I mean, you could extrapolate this, of course, into adulthood. You're in a certain job, you're in a position, you get a promotion, or you go to a different place, or whatever the situation might be. And all of a sudden, you're in a different field of competition.
Oh, yeah. And you feel like, how did I get here? What did I do? I fooled them.
I don't deserve to be here.
I don't deserve to be here. Yeah. How am I going to make sure that I can, achieve or do the things that they think that I'm going to do? And so you overcompensate by doing whatever it is that you think that you need to do.
Also, the other factor is a lot of times those individuals who are at the higher levels of achievement in whatever they're setting, they have that sense of competition. And I think that it's interesting to consider, how do the academic settings, if we're talking about students, influence those beliefs and those feelings as they go through those programs? What might be very functional or helpful in one situation, in a different situation can become very harmful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So they get into these environments where they're exposed to other peers that they might perceive as more intelligent, and they have certain characteristics or certain coping mechanisms that they don't have, or that they've achieved all of these things. They have a higher SAT score than me. They are getting A's and I'm struggling here trying to make a B. Because I have to maintain some GPA requirement for my honors program, and it can affect their academic self-concept.
Yeah.
It's these psychological obstacles that I've been really interested in. Okay, how can we help students give them the strength, the psychological strength to persevere and persist through these challenges?
Have that resilience to get through those things.
Mm-hmm.
We talked just a little bit about kind of motivation, and how that really influences all of this. Was there anything specific that you drew as you were studying this about different motivational theories? How does motivation impact somebody's well-being or level of effort, level of success?
So we have another study that is under review right now, and that actually talks about how motivation is impacting the imposter phenomenon, or feelings of the imposter phenomenon. Also, we looked at some of the other studies that have done this, but we were interested in like mastery goal orientations, meaning like you feel like you want to master, you want to learn it, versus performance-oriented goals. So performance approach, where you're like, I want to show them that I can do this. Versus performance avoidant, like you're trying to avoid failure. And in that study, we found that performance avoidant goals were more predictive of the imposter phenomenon.
Like, I don't want to try this because if I try it and I fail, that's worse than trying it and learning something. Or
I want to perform, like I want to do this so that I don't fail, or avoiding it altogether so you don't show that you fail.
And that goes back to that socially prescribed perfectionism. Like, what are other people thinking about me? What are other people's expectations, as opposed to what I need or what is best for me?
Exactly. Thinking that other people are putting these pressures on you.
I think it's really important also to just consider, in general, imposter phenomenon is occurring with people who are generally high performing. That's a generalization. I mean, I think that, like you said earlier, it's like it can happen for anyone in different situations, but especially in the field of gifted education, just education in general, there's a lot of debate about the value of gifted programs. or just in society in general? Like, what is the value of even IQ testing? You know, what is internal, like innate, and what is like nature versus nurture?
Yeah.
I mean, that's very big picture stuff. But do you have any thoughts or reflections about how those pieces integrate and influence individuals who deal with imposter phenomenon?
Oh, dang. These are the hard questions. Yes, I have lots of thoughts on this. I think that, I guess to start with gifted programs and the relation with the imposter phenomenon, this is actually another reason why I was interested in this was I'm interested in the mismatch between identification and appropriate service. I think that frequently we are identifying students for services that aren't matching their abilities. And then they get out from high school and then they go to college and they're like, what? Like, what am I doing here? What was I prepared for to do? And I think that there are some schools that are doing a really good job of that, of trying to connect students. There's some great programs out there, but by and large, from my experience as an educator, I was an AP World History and AP Psychology teacher, and seeing a mismatch even vertically from the elementary school, middle school to the high school, to then understanding how that was connecting and transitioning into college. That's been a big focus of like what my interest is in. Okay, well, they're getting into these hyper-competitive environments. Well, what were they experiencing whenever they were in their gifted program? And how can we give them the tools in these lower levels to then help them be successful, not only in college, but just in life as adults?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that there should be like a social emotional curriculum or anything like that. I mean, that can be part of things. Academics is what we focus on whenever we're in school. We're trying to give them the academic skills to be successful, but the specific ones that can develop their own domain specific abilities, I think that's lacking, and it's going to translate in their trajectories. And what can we do to help give them like psychological coaching and mentoring early on, giving them support networks, things to help them develop those abilities so that they can, if they go into a hyper competitive environment, they can be like, oh, I've experienced this before. I know exactly what to do. How can I combat these negative self-beliefs that I might have about myself? I've actually had more students reach out to me in the last few years as they are going through college that were my AP students. And they're like, why didn't we talk about how I could better time manage? And I'm like, we did, but, or like, why didn't we cover, XYZ, or why didn't my other classes talk to me about this whenever I'm learning about like neuroscience at UT? That piece, I think, is our students are human and they are trying to just experience life, and there's obstacles that they're going to face, and what tools can we provide to them to increase their experience? So like, what are we doing in these gifted programs to increase their motivation, to help them develop more persistence? I think that translates to, if they were to have a positive experience, then whenever they get into college and occupations where they're having to deal with imposter beliefs of like, I don't feel like I belong here, they can be like, no, like I've done
hard things and I've been successful and I can overcome this too.
Yes, I actually love saying that to students. Say I can do hard things.
Yeah.
And I say that to myself too.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I'm trying to, I've gotten really into statistics as a graduate student, and some of it is still new to me. And I am like, no, I can do this. Doesn't matter, the experience that I didn't have in high school or even in my undergrad. I can learn this and I can do this. And having models and mentors who also have that mentality can be very empowering to others.
I have a whole tangent that I could go down with that, and I think I'm going to avoid it. But the only thing I'll say is just, isn't it interesting now? Because I can relate to that. And I think, and you mentioned statistics, and I feel like just because I can relate to that, like I didn't take a lot of high-level math classes when I was in high school or school because I wasn't good at it. I just wasn't good at it. And now having 2 master's degrees and, doing the writing that I do and everything else, it's like I've had to kind of teach myself how to do those things. And I look back and I go, I could have done that.
Yeah.
But again, it kind of goes back to some of those feelings of, if I attempt this, will I be successful? What does it mean if something is hard? How will people perceive that?
Oh, yeah.
And then that performance avoidance, like, I'm just not even going to try because that's a risk and it's easier to just take this other path.
I can relate with that so much in my own schooling. When growing up, I was in like honors, social studies, English, and science. But my math scores were always just kind of like, they meet standard. They might be a little bit above, but they meet standard. And I just was like, well, I must not be very good at it. And then internalizing that over and over and over again. And then I get to my first stats class in grad school. And I'm like, oh, I'm actually pretty good at this.
This makes sense.
And I think that like building confidence in something and having, like, I had such a phenomenal stats teacher, like, and I've had quite a few that were just great in my program. And I feel like that helped me dispel some of these, like, oh, I can't do this. But no, they're like, no, you can do this and you're doing well at this.
It makes me wonder also, we've talked about gifted kids or just high ability, whether they're identified or not. Sometimes that label gets misused or misinterpreted or whatever. But then you've also got just other neurodivergent kids, perhaps who are twice exceptional, or a lot of times neurodivergent kids who are very bright don't get identified. Do you have any suspicions? I mean, I know this wasn't part of what you really necessarily looked into directly, but what are your thoughts about how imposter phenomenon might impact those individuals?
Actually, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I was talking to Dr. Wren about how I think that there should be more studies over twice exceptionality and the imposter phenomenon. One example with like ADHD. ADHD individuals can experience rejection sensitivity dysphoria, where they have this heightened emotional sensitivity to rejection and criticism. And imagine feeling that way. And then you also have this, high ability in something. And then you're in an environment where you receive criticism and then you shut down and then you start masking your abilities. And then you aren't identified.
Right.
That's just one example. But I mean, this could be autistic individuals, someone with a learning disability, dyslexia, dyscalculia, like any of these different disabilities. And they internalize this sense that, they're a phony, they're a fraud, they don't know anything.
Yeah.
I certainly think that there is a connection there that should be further studied. To my knowledge, I don't think that it has been. I think there's been more on just like self-beliefs and self-esteem and self-concept, but not necessarily the imposter phenomenon. I think that if they feel that way, then they might not actively reach out to teachers, and teachers might not realize that these experiences that they're having internally and this hypersensitivity to criticism is something that I've been thinking about with ADHD for personal reasons, but I think that is something that should be explored.
Yeah. As we wrap up our conversation, I guess the last thing I want to ask you is, if you were talking to somebody who's dealing with imposter syndrome, a student or maybe even a friend, a colleague, what would you say to them? What would you say to them to help them get through that?
First off, I would tell them you're not alone, and try to help normalize the experience for them, and let them tell me, what it is what they're thinking. And then, trying to explain to them that there's other people who feel this way and we need to support one another.
Yeah.
We found that support networks and systems are really important to dispelling these negative self-beliefs, and have them join in a support system of other individuals that feel that way. We do that with graduate students in the Research and Evaluation Network. I'm the co-chair for that for NAGC, and there's so many of us that feel that those imposter feelings, and just needing a network of people that can boost them. Find a mentor also that you can talk to would be another suggestion that I would make. But The big part is just normalizing the experience and finding a group of people that you can talk to.
Lindsay, thank you so much for your time today talking to us about this.
Thank you for having me.
Neurodivergent folks may have a lot of experiences that have fostered feelings of inadequacy. Being a square peg person that doesn't fit into a round hole world provides a lot of opportunities for questioning oneself. What did you learn about yourself when you were growing up? Did you trust yourself to be successful? What are our neurodivergent kids learning about themselves at home and in the classroom? A healthy dose of humility never hurt anyone, but too much self-doubt can definitely undermine both outward performance and inward feelings of self-efficacy. I've been reflecting lately on the benefit of using self-compassion as a vital tool for self-care. And I think people dealing with feelings of being an imposter, not good enough, can benefit from practicing more self-compassion. We can teach our neurodiverse youth how to give the same compassion to themselves that they naturally provide to others. And we can also practice it ourselves. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
Thank you to Lindsay Lee. You can learn more about her and find links to her studies on our episode page at neurodiversitypodcast.com. Our host is Emily Kircher-Morris. Our office manager and social media director is Krista Brown. I'm the executive producer, Dave Morris. For all of us, thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. This is a service of the Neurodiversity Alliance.